On this vote, the yeas are 260, the nays are 142, present is 3. The journal stands approved. For what purpose does the gentleman from Pennsylvania seek recognition?
Madam Chairman, I rise to request unanimous consent that the name of the gentleman from Minnesota, Mr. Paulson, be removed as the co-sponsor of H.R. 1094.
Without objection. For what purpose does the gentlewoman from Tennessee seek recognition?
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I ask unanimous consent that all members may have 5 legislative days to revise and extend their remarks and to include extraneous material on H.R. 7.
Without objection.
Pursuant to House Resolution 465, I call up H.R. 7 and ask for its immediate consideration in the House.
Before the clerk reports the title of the bill, I ask that everyone take their conversations off the floor. The House will be in order. The clerk will report the title of the bill.
H.R. 7, a bill to prohibit taxpayer-funded abortions.
Pursuant to House Resolution 465, an amendment in the nature of a substitute consisting of the text of Rules Committee Print 113-33 is adopted, and the bill as amended is considered read. The House will be in order. The bill shall be debatable 1 hour, equally divided among and controlled by the chair and ranking minority member of the Committee on the Judiciary, the Committee on Ways and Means, and the Committee on Energy and Commerce. The gentleman from Virginia, Mr. Goodlatte, the gentleman from Michigan, Mr. Conyers, the gentlewoman from Kansas, Ms. Jenkins, the gentleman from New York, Mr. Crowley, the gentlewoman from Tennessee, Ms. Blackburn, and the gentlewoman from California, Ms. Capps. Each will control 10 minutes. The chair now recognizes the gentlewoman from Tennessee, Ms. Blackburn.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I yield myself such time as I may consume. Madam Speaker, I come to the floor today in strong support of H.R. 7, the No Taxpayer Funding for Abortion and Abortion Insurance Disclosure Act. This legislation is written with the same simple principle that has been supported on a bipartisan basis for decades. No taxpayer dollars should be spent on abortions and abortion coverage. H.R. 7 establishes a permanent government-wide prohibition on taxpayer subsidies for abortion. This bill is all the more necessary because of the President's health care law and its attack on this long-standing protection of taxpayer dollars. For example, the health care law's premium subsidies can be used to purchase coverage on exchanges that include coverage of abortion. The ACA breaks with the tradition of the Hyde Amendment, which has ensured that federal dollars do not subsidize plans that cover abortion. The bill before us would simply codify the Hyde Amendment language so it applies across the federal government. Consumers should also have the right to know whether the plan they are selecting on an exchange includes abortion coverage. While the ACA included some notification provisions, many of our constituents are simply unable to find out whether a plan is paying for abortions. In fact, this inability to find out whether exchange plans provide abortion coverage seems to extend to the Secretary of Health and Human Services. In October of last year, Secretary Sebelius committed in testimony before the Energy and Commerce Committee to provide the Congress and the American people a full list of exchange plans providing abortion coverage. She was asked again to provide this list in December, yet we are still waiting as the days tick by. We do not have this list. The self-appointed most transparent administration in history is simply either unwilling or unable to comply with this request. This is why we have added provisions of the Abortion Insurance Full Disclosure Act. This would ensure Americans have the right to know whether plans on the exchange are providing abortion coverage. This bill is about protecting taxpayer dollars and protecting life. It also ensures we have at least some transparency under the President's health care law. I urge my colleagues to support this bill, and I reserve the balance of my time.
The gentlewoman from Tennessee reserves the balance of her time. The gentlewoman from California is recognized.
Madam Speaker, I yield myself as much time as I may consume.
Without objection.
Madam Speaker, I rise to speak in opposition to H.R. 7. House Resolution 7 is not based on fact. The Affordable Care Act does not secretly funnel taxpayer dollars to fund abortions, and it is not based on the real experiences of American women and families. They want to make their own personal health care decisions in consultation with their doctor and their spiritual advisor, not their congressman. Instead, this bill would squarely put the government, namely the IRS, in the exam room by effectively raising the taxes of those who choose an insurance plan that happens to cover abortion services. That includes hardworking men, women, and families who would be penalized. And it would burden small businesses, making each one second-guess their current insurance plan. It would make them change their coverage if they want to keep their health insurance coverage affordable. Simply put, H.R. 7 would dictate what individuals can do with their own private dollars. Instead of this cynical attack on women's personal decision-making, we should be focusing on empowering our nation's families, on the economy, strengthening the middle class, helping parents provide the best for their kids. It's really time to stop reverting back to the culture wars and start trusting our nation's women, our nation's families and small businesses to make their own personal health care decisions. I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentlewoman from California reserves. The gentlewoman from Tennessee is recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. At this time, I yield 1 minute to the gentlelady from Minnesota, Ms. Bachmann.
Gentlelady from Minnesota is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. We were told over and over again, if you like your health insurance plan, you can keep it. We all found out that wasn't true. I will never forget on the day that Obamacare passed, I was here in this chamber, we were promised by the President of the United States that not only would the taxpayers of this country not be forced to pay for other people's abortions, we were also told that abortion would not be a part of Obamacare. But we know today that isn't true. Abortion is a part of Obamacare, and what's worse, no matter how anyone feels about that issue, there's pretty strong agreement that no one should be forced to violate their conscience and pay for other people's abortions and be forced to do that. But that's the way it is. H.R. 7 makes President Obama's promise stand up and ring true, and it's this, that no taxpayer-funded money ever goes to pay for someone else's abortion. Couldn't we unite on this principle? This is important, and I yield back.
Yep, reserve my time.
The gentlewoman from California is recognized.
Madam Speaker, I'm pleased to yield 1.5 minutes to my colleague from California, the ranking member of the Energy and Commerce Committee, Mr. Waxman.
I thank you for yielding to me. Existing law very clearly states no taxpayers' money can fund abortions. That's already the law, with the exception of rape, incest, or to save a woman's life. So the Republicans are coming in and saying, we've got to make sure that no taxpayers' money is going to be used to pay for any insurance that might provide abortions. Well, the law, the Affordable Care Act, provides that if you get an insurance policy in the exchange, you can choose a policy that does not provide abortion coverage. But if you choose a policy that has abortion coverage, that portion of the policy must be paid by the purchaser, not the government. So this is all like so much, in fact, it's like all we do around here is propaganda. It's politics. The Republicans try to make people believe that their taxpayers' dollars are being used to pay for abortions. It's not true. This bill is bad in substance. It's an unfortunate bill that it tries to interfere with the ability of people to buy with their own money a policy that may cover abortion services, which is a legal medical service. Yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman from California yields back. The gentlewoman from California reserves. The gentlewoman from Tennessee is recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I yield 1 minute to the gentlelady from North Carolina, who's a member of the Energy and Commerce Committee, Ms. Elmers.
The gentlewoman from North Carolina is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you to my distinguished colleague, and thank you, Madam Speaker. I rise today in support of H.R. 7, the No Taxpayer Funding for Abortion Act, of which I am a co-sponsor, a proud co-sponsor. I'm here today for those who cannot speak for themselves. The premise of this legislation is nothing new. It simply continues the long-standing prohibition of using taxpayer dollars to pay for abortions. Regardless of whether you're pro-life or not, most Americans recognize that it is unfair to force every American in this country to subsidize abortion. This is, however, exactly what Obamacare does. It has allowed taxpayer subsidies for health care plans that cover elective abortions. H.R. 7 is as much about protecting the taxpayer as it is about protecting the unborn. I urge my colleagues to make the fair choice and vote yes on this bill. Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I yield back the remainder of my time.
The gentlewoman from Tennessee reserves. The gentlewoman from California is recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I'm now pleased to yield 1.5 minutes to my colleague from New Jersey, Mr. Pallone, who is the ranking member of the Health Subcommittee of Energy and Commerce.
The gentleman from New Jersey is recognized for 1.5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I rise today in opposition to H.R. 7. This legislation does nothing but impede women's access to health care in this country and turns the clock back on reproductive rights 38 years. The bill's sponsors claim it will prevent taxpayer dollars from paying for abortions. However, we already know that federal funds do not go to abortions except in the limited cases of rape, incest, or to save the mother's life. This bill does not simply codify the Hyde Amendment. That's bogus. What this bill does is prohibit millions of American families from using their own money to buy health plans that include abortion coverage. Madam Speaker, spending time attacking women's health shows just how far out of touch Republicans in Washington are. Instead of focusing on the economy and job creation, my colleagues on the other side of the aisle would rather focus on legislation that puts access to reproductive health care in danger and undermines a woman's right to choose. On December 28th, unemployment insurance expired for Americans still struggling to find work. Meanwhile, Democrats have a bill that would raise the minimum wage to $10.10 an hour, generating economic activity, creating jobs, and growing the middle class. These should be the priorities of the House of Representatives, not this phony bill before us. This legislation is an unprecedented, radical assault on women's health care. I strongly urge my colleagues to vote no. I yield back.
The gentleman from New Jersey yields back. The gentlewoman from California reserves. The gentlewoman from Tennessee is recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I yield 1 minute to Mr. Stutzman from Indiana, who has been such an advocate on our life issues.
The gentleman from Indiana is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I thank the gentlelady for yielding and for her hard work on this very important issue. I'm humbled to join my pro-life colleagues here on the House floor and, more importantly, the millions of pro-life Americans across the country. Although this debate is often clouded by empty euphemisms like choice, we cannot forget the human element at the heart of this issue. This isn't about abstract concepts. This is about babies, the most vulnerable members of our society. At the same time, we must show compassion and offer help to those struggling through what seems like an impossible circumstance. And as civilized people, we ought to prevent taxpayer dollars from subsidizing the senseless destruction of innocent lives once and for all. After all, we're a nation founded to protect life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Madam Speaker, today we have an opportunity to do exactly that with common sense legislation. Millions of pro-life Americans don't want their tax dollars used to subsidize abortions. I urge my colleagues to support the No Taxpayer Funding for Abortion Act. And, Madam Speaker, I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman's time has expired. The gentlewoman from Tennessee reserves. The gentlewoman from California is recognized.
Madam Speaker, I'm now very pleased to yield a minute and a half to my colleague from Colorado, a real champion for women's issues, Ms. DeGette. 1.5 minutes.
The gentlewoman from Colorado is recognized for 1.5 minutes.
Madam Speaker, this so-called No Taxpayer Funding for Abortion Act has got to be the most deceptively named bill of this Congress. Here are the facts. There is no taxpayer funding for abortion. The Affordable Care Act does not change that. Let me say that again. There is no taxpayer funding for abortion. The Affordable Care Act does not change that. The ACA contains a hard-fought compromise that guarantees that the tax credits made available through the exchanges are segregated out for plans that cover certain women's health benefits. This bill is an attempt to undo that compromise. It effectively bans coverage of important women's health services in the new health insurance exchanges. It restricts the way that women can use their own private dollars to purchase private insurance. It says small businesses cannot get tax credits if they choose to use their private dollars to purchase private insurance that covers important women's benefits. It goes far, far beyond the Hyde Amendment, which prohibits taxpayer funding for most abortions in the annual appropriations bills. It also, for the first time, puts the Hyde Amendment into law. And it says women in the District of Columbia will not have the same right to access health services as women in other states throughout this country. This bill would not only restrict comprehensive health care for women, it would also undermine a woman's right to make her own health care decisions under her insurance policy with her own money. Vote no.
The gentlewoman's time has expired. The gentlewoman from Tennessee is recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And at this time, I yield 1 minute to the gentleman from North Carolina, Mr. Meadows.
The gentleman from North Carolina is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and thank my colleague from Tennessee for her leadership on this particular issue. And for far too long, Madam Speaker, I was silent on this particular issue. Some 22 years ago, as we were expecting our first child and my wife was pregnant, I began to talk to her about this particular thing, and there my son was kicking in her mother's womb, and as we started to see this, I realized very profoundly that not only was it life, but that it responded, and my son was responding to my voice and my touch, and as we saw that, I realized that I had been silent for far too long. For us to not say something today and to allow, regardless of where you are on this particular issue, to allow taxpayer dollars to be spent for many of us who find this just appalling that it is even legal today, is something that we must stand together. And so for those who can't speak for themselves, I stand here today and urge my colleague to support this particular legislation. I yield back.
The gentleman from North Carolina's time has expired. The gentlewoman from California is recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I'm pleased to yield to my colleague from Illinois, Ms. Schakowsky, 1.5 minutes.
The gentlewoman from Illinois is recognized for 1.5 minutes.
Thank you. You know, our colleagues on the other side of the aisle, my colleagues on the other side of the aisle, seem to be absolutely obsessed with taking away a woman's right to make her own personal health decisions with her own money. Today, we could be extending unemployment benefits to 1.6 million Americans. Instead, we're considering legislation that would discriminate against a woman's right with her own money to pick an insurance policy. We could be raising the minimum wage instead of effectively banning abortion coverage in the ACA market, even though not a penny of federal dollars will go to do that. We could be passing the Healthy Families Act to provide sick leave, paid sick leave, instead of erecting more barriers to women's ability to protect their health, and yes, including access to safe and legal abortions. We should be defeating this legislation for 3 reasons. First, because women and their doctors and not politicians should make their own health care, should be making the health care decisions. Secondly, because we should not be undermining access to comprehensive insurance coverage of women's health insurance paid by the insured woman, not the government. And third, because we have more pressing priorities to address. It is time that we moved on to things that matter to the American people and not continue this relentless war on women's rights. And I yield back.
The gentlewoman's time has expired. The gentlewoman from Tennessee is recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. In yielding myself just a moment, I think it's important to realize that over 60% of the American people agree with us on this issue. And you can look at survey after survey. They do not want taxpayer funds used for abortion. Joining us in this fight to make certain that we preserve taxpayer funds, Ms. Roby, who is a member of the Appropriations Committee from Alabama. I yield 1 minute.
Gentlewoman from Alabama is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I thank the gentlelady from Tennessee for her leadership on this. I've been intrigued with the latest rhetoric in the so-called war on women. I'm intrigued because at some point anti-abortion activists, pro-abortion activists stopped using the word abortion. Instead of using the A word, they use terms like women's health or reproductive rights. It's a clever word game designed to disguise the truth and build artificial support. After all, who would be against the health of a woman? Who would oppose anyone's right to reproduce? But what about the baby's health? What about the unborn child's right to live? They don't call it abortion anymore because people understand what abortion is. It's the taking of a life. It is death where life once existed. It is cruel and tragic, and there is no place in the federal budget for funding it. Thank you, Madam Speaker. I yield back.
Gentlewoman from Alabama yields back. The gentlewoman from California is recognized.
I am now pleased, Madam Speaker, to yield 1.5 minutes to our colleague from Florida, Ms. Castor.
Gentlewoman from Florida is recognized for 1.5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and thanks to my colleague for yielding time. Madam Speaker, here at the start of the new year, when Americans are facing so many challenges in their lives, the Republicans are taking us off on this cruel tangent. We should be debating how to boost wages across this country, how to better educate our children, and how to ensure that everyone has a chance and an opportunity to be successful in their lives and secure in their futures. But yet again, a handful of mostly older, mostly male politicians here in Washington, D.C. believe that the priority for us is to interfere in the personal lives of women. They want to intrude in the personal, private health care decisions of women and their families. They think they know best, but how can they? Well, I trust women and their families to make their own decisions, not the politicians here in Washington, D.C. Republicans in Congress should respect our right to privacy. Politicians shouldn't be allowed to direct treatments and oversee diagnosis from Washington, and they shouldn't unnecessarily restrict a woman's health insurance coverage and a comprehensive policy that she has paid for. This Republican bill is an unprecedented radical assault on women's right to make her own health and health insurance decisions. It interferes with the relationship between the patient and doctor. But thankfully, this bill is not going anywhere after the vote today. But it does provide evidence of what Republicans in the House believe is the top priority for America. Is it jobs? No. Is it boosting wages? No. Is it improving our schools and higher ed? No. The Republicans' top priority today is to interfere in the personal lives and health decisions of women across our country. Vote no. Thank you.
The gentlewoman's time has expired. The gentlewoman from Tennessee.
A reserve.
The gentlewoman from Tennessee reserves. The gentlewoman from California is recognized.
May I inquire how much time is remaining?
The gentlewoman from California has 1 minute. And the gentlewoman from Tennessee has 2 minutes.
I'm prepared to close, but all right, I will. Madam Speaker, H.R. 7 is not about taxpayer funding. It is about what women, families, and small businesses can do with their own money, their own private dollars. It is about keeping Congress and the IRS out of the doctor's office. Madam Speaker, I urge my colleagues to start trusting America's women to make their own decisions. I urge my colleagues to vote no on this dangerous bill, and I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentlewoman from California yields back. The gentlewoman from Tennessee is recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. What an interesting debate we have, and what a difference we have in philosophies as we approach the work of this nation. I have found it really quite curious, as we have some who say we should be talking about how we live better lives and jobs and futures. And you know what, Madam Speaker, as we talk today, what our focus is on is making certain that these precious unborn children do have that right to life, to liberty, to the pursuit of happiness. Yes, indeed. And today, let me just clear up the record for the legislation before us where we talk about no taxpayer funding of abortion. I want to read from the legislation itself, Madam Speaker. Section 304 in Title I. Nothing in this chapter shall be construed as prohibiting any individual, entity, or state or locality from purchasing separate abortion coverage or health benefits coverage that includes abortion, so long as such coverage is paid for entirely using only funds not authorized or appropriated by federal law. Reading directly from the bill and then going to Section 306, nothing in this chapter shall repeal, amend, or have any effect on any other federal law to the extent such law imposes any limitation on the use of funds for abortion or for health benefits coverage that includes coverage of abortion beyond the limitations set forth in this chapter. So, Madam Speaker, may I lay the fears aside of my colleagues? This is an issue that 60% of the American people agree with us on. It is an action that they think is important to take, that it is important for taxpayers to have the assurance from their government that we are not going to have taxpayer funds used for abortions. I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentlewoman's time has expired.
Thank you, ma'am. Please, Jim.
The gentlewoman from Kansas is recognized.
Madam Speaker, I yield myself as much time as I may consume, and I ask unanimous consent to revise and extend my remarks.
Without objection.
Madam Speaker, I'm proud to stand before the House today in support of H.R. 7, the No Taxpayer Funding for Abortion Act. I supported this legislation last Congress because the message I have consistently received from my constituents is that they do not want their taxpayer dollars funding abortions, period. It's time to put this issue to rest once and for all. The majority of Americans, regardless of where they stand on the larger issue, do not want their taxpayer dollars paying for abortions. But for too long, we have had a patchwork of provisions when it comes to federal funding, which has created potential loopholes and confusion. H.R. 7 solidifies the long-standing provisions of the Hyde Amendment, which are especially needed when it comes to the Affordable Health Care Act. Madam Speaker, I don't have time to stand here and list all of the problems with the President's health care law, but one of these problems can be fixed through the passage of this bipartisan bill, which simply states taxpayer dollars will not pay for abortion. I reserve the balance of my time.
The gentlewoman from Kansas reserves. The gentleman from New York is recognized.
I thank the Speaker. When I go home to talk to my constituents back home in Queens and the portions of the Bronx that I represent, there are a lot of issues that they bring up to me. They want to see unemployment insurance restored. They want to see jobs created, and they want to see our economy strengthened. They want to see investments in infrastructure, in building our communities. But not once has anyone ever said, you know, forget all about that. Forget that stuff. Instead, they never said to me, please raise my taxes if Uncle Sam objects to the health care plan I've picked for me, my family, or my business. Yes, that's exactly what this bill does. It raises taxes on individuals, families, and small businesses. I offered an amendment that would block this bill from taking effect if it would raise taxes. But the Republican majority, with yet another closed rule, refused to make that amendment in order. Why? Because they knew that if that amendment were to become a part of this bill, it would kill this bill. Because no matter how you slice it, this Republican bill will raise taxes on hard-working Americans. Small businesses will pay more taxes because if their employee health plan covers abortion or reproductive care, the business will be denied the small business tax credit. No one denies that. Families will pay more in taxes when they lose any tax credits they received to purchase a health insurance plan, if the plan that works best for them happens to include abortion coverage. That's right. Families will have to give up on choosing their own plan. Stripping these health care tax credits will have the same effect as if we denied or stripped out similar tax credits like the child tax credit or the higher education tax credit. If this isn't a tax increase, I don't know what is. This bill interferes with personal choice and decisions. I find it ironic that my Republican colleagues claim to support ensuring Americans can pick a private health plan that suits their individual needs, until the plan they pick covers legal services they find personally objectionable. And when I find it ironic that my Republican colleagues oppose every suggested tax increase out there until it's one that advocates their social agenda. There's no question this is a serious issue and it deserves serious consideration. Yet on an issue as important as access to comprehensive health care coverage, and with such severe tax implications, it's outrageous that this bill was not first considered by the Ways and Means Committee. The reason for that is Republicans are rushing this new bill forward, not because they are looking to make good policy, but because they're looking to make good political friends. Good political friends who support a very narrow political agenda. I just wish the real issues that we need to be working on, like extending unemployment insurance for 1.6 million Americans, will get as much attention as all these made-up issues. And with that, Madam Speaker, I reserve the balance of my time.
The gentleman from New York reserves the balance of his time. The gentlewoman from Kansas is recognized.
Madam Speaker, I would yield myself such time as I might consume, simply to note that according to the staff of the Joint Committee on Taxation, the bill would have negligible effects on tax revenues. Similarly, CBO estimates, you'll have the balance of your time, my time is limited. The CBO estimates that any effects on direct spending would be negligible for each year and over the 10-year budget window. And with that, I would yield 3 minutes to the gentleman from New Jersey, the author of the bill, Mr. Smith.
I thank my
Gentleman
good
from
friend,
New Jersey is
Ms. Jenkins,
recognized for 3 minutes.
and thank her for her leadership and her very eloquent remarks. You know, my friend from New York talked about a narrow agenda and a narrow perspective. More than 60% of every poll, in the case of one poll, 69% of all women in the United States of America say they do not want their funds being used to subsidize abortion on demand. Let me remind my colleagues that this legislation accomplishes 3 goals. 1, makes the Hyde Amendment and other current abortion funding prohibitions permanent. We just reauthorized all of those riders just a few weeks ago. This just makes them permanent. Ensure that the Affordable Care Act faithfully conforms to the Hyde Amendment as promised by the President of the United States, and provide full disclosure, transparency, and prominent display that is absolutely lacking right now of the extent to which any health insurance plan on the exchange funds abortion. Madam Speaker, the President of the United States stood about 10 feet from where I'm standing right now back in September of 2009 and told the joint session of Congress, and I quote, "Under our plan, no federal dollars will be used to fund abortion." The executive order that was issued in March of 2010 said, and I quote, that the Affordable Care Act maintains current Hyde Amendment restrictions governing abortion policy and extends those restrictions to newly created health insurance exchanges. And Speaker, that's simply not true. It is absolutely not true. As my colleagues know, the Hyde Amendment has 2 parts. It prohibits direct funding for abortion, and it bans funding to any insurance coverage, any insurance plan that includes abortion except in the cases of rape, incest, or to save the life of the mother. Earlier speakers have said not a penny will go to pay for abortion. Yet under the Affordable Care Act, massive amounts of public funds, what are they if they're not public? They're public funds coming out of the U.S. Treasury in the form of tax credits, that's the word used, $796 billion in direct spending over 10 years, according to CBO, will pay for insurance plans, many, perhaps most of which will include elective abortions, abortion on demand. Madam Speaker, that massively violates the Hyde Amendment. You can't have it both ways. You can't say you're for the Hyde Amendment and you're comporting with the Hyde Amendment when you violate it in such a way. Let me also point out to my colleagues that there are many states where pro-life individuals and constituents will have no opportunity to buy a plan that is pro-life on the exchanges. That includes Connecticut and Rhode Island. Every plan is abortion on demand. So their premium dollars, your tax dollars, and mine will be combining to buy plans that provide for abortion on demand. You know, in 2014, Madam Speaker, we have learned so much about the magnificent life of an unborn child. Increasingly, we've also learned about the deleterious effects that abortions have on women, psychologically, to children born subsequently to them, and, of course, to other aspects of their physical health. Please support H.R. 7.
The gentleman's time has expired. The gentleman from New York is recognized.
Speaker, gentlelady, how much time we have?
The gentleman from New York has 6 minutes, and the gentlewoman from Kansas has 5½ minutes.
I didn't need that much. I yield to the gentleman from Washington 3 minutes. Mr. McDermott.
The gentleman from Washington is recognized for 3 minutes.
Madam Speaker, when you're not limited by the facts, you can say almost anything out on this floor, and we're hearing that today, because in the grand tradition of the anti-choice terminology, the title of this bill is an absolute farce. Taxpayers do not currently fund abortions, and this legislation would do nothing more than make it difficult for private businesses to provide adequate health care for their workers, restrict how our nation's capital conducts its affairs, and generally block poor women from accessing safe and legal abortions. In 1963, I was an intern in Buffalo, New York. Before the Hyde Amendment, before all the business, and abortions were illegal. And I stood there on the general medicine ward with 2 women, one with 8 children, one with 12 children, who had gotten septic abortions. done in a back alley, and they died. They left 8 and 12 children in that situation. Now, they did that because they didn't have access to clean abortions. They'd made a choice. They can make a choice. If we say women can't make a choice, that's very simple. We'll just tell women what to do, which is really what this bill is all about. The Republicans want to tell women what to do. Stay out of our lives, get the government out of our lives? No, in every area except women's health. Now, the truth of the matter is that they're not tax credits or health coverage. The heart of this debate is a simple question about, does women's health count? Do women deserve comprehensive health care? Or are they some kind of submissive person who hangs around the house and we tell them what to do? Are their health care needs real? And does 51% of our population deserve control over their own health decisions? Or are they special exceptions who need to be taken care of because they can't decide for themselves? Do they have a right to make health decisions for themselves? Does Congress have a right to stigmatize a safe, legal procedure? Imagine if we were standing up here debating whether or not private business would be allowed to help employees get coverage for prostate cancer, or erectile dysfunction drugs, or vasectomies. Suppose we were to pass a law and say you can't pay for that kind of stuff. Imagine if we told men that they would lose their deserved tax credits in exchange if they purchased insurance that covered their health needs as they decide them. I ask for an additional minute. 30 seconds. Women's health care is health care. It is not Congress's job to stigmatize legal medical procedures and punish women who use them. It is also not Congress' job to tell Washington, D.C. what to do or to stop people from having their options. This bill is insulting to women, and the Republicans are asking for it in the next election. If anybody votes for you, it's because they haven't paid attention to what you're doing out here today. You're insulting every woman in this country. She can't make her own decision about her health care. I urge you to vote no.
The gentleman's time has expired. The gentlewoman from Kansas is recognized.
Madam Speaker, I would like to give 2 minutes to the gentleman from Pennsylvania, my colleague on Ways and Means Committee, Mr. Kelly.
Gentleman from Pennsylvania is recognized for 2 minutes.
I thank the gentlelady. And Madam Speaker, this is appalling that we're even at this point in talking about this providing health care for women. I'm shocked. If we're not providing the best possible medical help for expectant mothers and their unborn child, that's not the issue. This country has always been the champion of life around the world, protecting human rights. We've always showed up at every single encounter whenever people were being treated in a way that we thought was not right. We rail about Syria and the fact that they are losing their citizens, that Assad is killing their citizens, yet since 1973, we have aborted 56 million unborn children. 56 million unborn children. And today we're having a discussion on H.R. 7, where the only thing the American taxpayers are saying, we know by law a woman can make that choice, but we also know that taxpayers don't want to fund it. It is appalling that we have to have this type of a discussion in the United States of America when you know how we feel in our hearts and in our souls. You know how people feel about this. I want you to think about those 56 million unborn children who could have made a huge difference in this world. It is absolutely appalling to sit in this great room where there's so many great debates over the protection of human rights and freedom and liberty, and to be having this discussion. This has nothing to do with us cutting back on women's health care. It has to do with taxpayers not wanting to fund an abortion. This is what we're talking about. Please, and as the gentleman just said, it's about the next election. Really? Have we reduced ourselves to only winning elections and not winning behalf of people's rights? These are human rights. Ma'am, I appreciate the time to come and speak, and Madam Chair, I got to tell you, this is one of the most disturbing things that we face in the country today, and I want our people to think about this. 56 million children have been aborted. If we can't wake up and smell the roses on this, then shame on us. I yield back.
Gentleman's time has expired.
Madam Speaker, I yield 1 minute to the gentlelady from California, Ms. Lofgren.
Gentlewoman from California is recognized for 1 minute.
Madam Speaker, there is no tax money being used for abortions. That's been true since Henry Hyde served here with us. What this bill does is not address that issue. It really is intended to eliminate abortion coverage in private insurance plans. Our witness, Professor Wood, testified in the Judiciary Committee that eliminating the tax benefits, essentially raising taxes if a small business offers a broad insurance plan that includes abortion, will result in dropping that portion of the coverage. So this is really an extreme measure. I understand that not everyone believes that women should make this choice. If you're opposed to abortion, don't have an abortion. But don't put the federal government in charge of the decisions that are properly and legally made by women along with their husbands and families. This is an extreme agenda. It's wrong, and I urge my colleagues to vote no. I yield back.
The gentlewoman's time has expired. The gentlewoman from Kansas is recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I'd like to yield 1 minute to the gentleman from Arizona, Mr. Franks.
Gentleman from Arizona is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Madam Chair, throughout history, there has often been great intensity surrounding the debates over protecting the innocent lives of those who, through no fault of their own, find themselves obscured in the shadows of humanity. It encourages me greatly that in nearly all of those cases, the collective conscience was finally moved in favor of the victims. The same thing is beginning to happen in this debate related to innocent unborn children. No matter how the left has tried to obscure the true issue, we are finally beginning to ask ourselves the real question. Does abortion take the life of a child? And we are finally beginning to realize as a human family, Madam Speaker, that it does. Ultrasound technology now demonstrates to all reasonable observers both the humanity of the victim and the inhumanity of what is being done to them. And we are finally beginning to realize as Americans that 56 million lost little lives and their blood staining the foundations of this nation is enough. And I yield back, Madam Speaker.
Gentleman from Arizona yields back.
Madam Speaker,
gentleman from New York is recognized.
Madam Speaker, we're prepared to close, and if the gentlelady has any additional speakers before she closes, I'll reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman from New York has 1.5 minutes. The gentlewoman from Kansas has 2.5 minutes.
Madam Speaker, I don't see any additional speakers, so we will be prepared to close.
Is the gentleman from New York prepared to close?
Yes, ma'am.
The gentleman from New York is recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I thank the gentlelady. The gentlelady from Kansas, my good friend, who I respect greatly, said the overall tax effect is negligible. I would ask, negligible to whom? If you're that person who can't get a needed tax credit, it's not negligible to you. It's very real. Part of what's so troubling about this bill is it's not only how much further it goes than current existing law, but how much further this kind of thinking could go. One of the restrictions on medical procedures are next, as my friend from Washington said. If your procedure involves stem cells, prenatal care for teen mothers, could hospitals lose funding for training doctors in necessary procedures that this majority may deem troubling? The question is, where does it end? How many other ways can the majority use our laws to punish hardworking Americans? Can they take away your student loans because your teacher wants you to read Catcher in the Rye? Can they limit your tax benefits for buying a house in the wrong neighborhood? The slope is steep and slippery. Vote no on this wrong-headed bill, and I yield back the balance.
The gentleman from New York yields back the balance of his time. The gentlewoman from Kansas is recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. We are not interested in raising anyone's taxes. This bill does not do that. We are simply ensuring that hardworking Americans who pay taxes and oppose abortion don't see their taxpayer dollars going to fund abortions. We've had legislation similar to this bill in place for over 3 decades. This legislation is not a new idea. The majority of Americans have long held that taxpayers should not be forced to foot the bill for abortion practices that they do not believe in. I would ask everyone to support passage of H.R. 7. And, Madam Speaker, I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentlewoman from Kansas yields back the balance of her time. So now it's Conyers and... Okay. Do I ask him why he speaks? The gentleman from Virginia is recognized.
Madam Speaker, I yield myself such time as I may consume.
The gentleman is recognized.
However stark Americans' differences of opinion can be on the matter of abortion generally, there has been long bipartisan agreement that federal taxpayer funds should not be used to destroy innocent life. The Hyde Amendment, named for its chief sponsor, former House Judiciary Committee Chairman Henry Hyde, has prohibited the federal funding of abortion since 1976, when it passed a House and Senate that was composed overwhelmingly of Democratic members. It has been renewed each appropriation cycle with few changes for over 35 years, supported by Congresses controlled by both parties and presidents from both parties. It is probably the most bipartisan pro-life proposal sustained over a longer period of time than any other. Just last week, a Marist landline and cell phone poll of over 2,000 adults found that 58% of those surveyed opposed or strongly opposed using any taxpayer dollars for abortions. It's time the Hyde Amendment was codified in the United States Code. H.R. 7, the No Taxpayer Funding for Abortion Act, sponsored by Representative Chris Smith of New Jersey, would do just that. It would codify the 2 core principles of the Hyde Amendment throughout the operations of the federal government, namely a ban on federal funding for abortions and a ban on use of federal funds for health benefits coverage that includes coverage of abortion. During the time the Hyde Amendment has been in place, probably millions and millions of innocent children and their mothers have been spared the horrors of abortion. The Congressional Budget Office has estimated that the Hyde Amendment has led to as many as 675,000 fewer abortions each year. Let that sink in for a few precious moments. The policy we will be discussing today has likely given America the gift of millions more children and consequently millions more mothers and millions more fathers, millions more lifetimes and trillions more loving gestures and other human gifts in all their diverse forms. What a stunningly wondrous legacy. I encourage my colleagues to support this important legislation, and I reserve the balance of my time.
The gentleman from Virginia reserves. The gentleman from Michigan is recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I yield myself as much time as I may consume.
The gentleman is recognized.
Ladies and gentlemen, H.R. 7 is not about the regulation of federal funds. Through the Hyde Amendment, Congress already prevents funding of abortion and has done so for more than 30 years. Nothing in the Affordable Care Act changes this fact. H.R. 7 is not needed to prevent the federal funding of abortion, nor does it merely codify existing law, as has been falsely asserted by those proponents. As a matter of fact, the bill on the floor today contains numerous new provisions adopted after the Judiciary Committee marked up and reported the bill. This version of the bill has never been examined, debated, or amended by any committee of the House. Yet my colleagues in the majority refuse to allow their colleagues any opportunity to amend this harmful bill today. This bill is far too significant and its impact on women far too harmful to foreclose meaningful debate and amendment as my colleagues in the majority have done. This measure represents yet another assault on women's health, care, and constitutionally protected rights and should be rejected. I reserve the balance of my time.
The gentleman from Michigan reserves. The gentleman from Virginia is recognized.
Madam Speaker, it is now my pleasure to yield 2 minutes to the gentlewoman from Missouri, Ms. Wagner.
Gentlewoman from Missouri is recognized for 2 minutes.
I thank the gentleman for yielding, and I thank Congressman Chris Smith for his leadership in protecting the rights of the unborn. Madam Speaker, I rise today in support